Well, hi guys, Island 2 came to an end just a few days ago. I made a whole video discussing the final lineup already, and this video is supposed to be somewhat of a continuation, but instead of talking about the debut trainees, I'm gonna talk about those girls that came so close to debuting but ended up not making it, and I'll try to explain why it was always so predictable that they wouldn't be part of the final lineup. I'm gonna be very straightforward and I'll talk about everything objectively. But always keep in mind that I liked all of these girls and I'm not trying to offend anybody. Now let's get started. Starting off with the trainee that everyone expected to debut, the trainee that was in most people's lineups and that was considered a lock for the final group. The thing about Fuko is, her journey through Island 2 felt stagnant. If you think about it, there were no ups and downs for her. If I picture her journey, I'd picture it as a straight line, a straight path with no bumps on the road. In other words, a lack of storyline. Aside from her talents, Fuko didn't have anything else going on for her. I remember that in the beginning she was highlighted as a motherly figure and someone with pretty good leadership. But the thing is, those qualities only existed in relation to other contestants. The moment Fuko was surrounded with trainees that did not need guidance, then this whole quality kinda disappeared. We've seen it when most of the grounders were eliminated. Those were trainees that Fuko really helped. But as the show progressed, we were left with people that could stand on their own. That's why we stopped seeing angel edits of Fuko being a great leader, and if you think about it, we were never really showed anything else about her, if not her vocals. But the thing is, in order to make it in a survival show, you either have to have a very engaging storyline, or if you don't have that, then you have to have extremely outstanding skills that will keep people interested in you despite everything. And unfortunately Fuko's good vocals have always been overshadowed by the two honorary main vocals in Island, Gyuri and Sujung. These two were clearly the first choices for the judges in terms of vocals, and they were also the first trainees everybody thought of when it came to singing skills. Fuko was always a step behind, good but not as good as them, so this didn't help her to compensate for the lack of storyline. I wanna quickly compare her to Sujung. Sujung didn't have an interesting storyline either. Despite the fake beef Mnet tried to create, it's not like we saw much of Jungkook's character. And in fact she didn't receive attention because she was an interesting character with an interesting story. She received as much attention because her skills were truly outstanding. If Jungkook had been less good than Gyuri at singing, then I'm not even sure she would have debuted, because her vocals would have been overshadowed and her lack of storyline would have made it all worse. This is exactly what happened to Fuko. The second thing I want to touch upon is the lack of versatility. If you think about it, the girls that ended up debuting all had to face challenges that forced them out of their comfort zone. It can be in terms of skills, such as Sarang trying to rap for the first time, or my becoming leader and having to create a whole choreography from scratch, or in terms of internal challenges, such as Jungkook and Gyuri being forced to work together despite the tension between them. All the girls had some moments where they did something they were not comfortable with, but Fuko never did. She always ended up doing what was expected of her, always getting the parts that we would expect, etc. And I know that sometimes it was up to the judges to assign parts and it's not like it was entirely her fault. But for example, during the finale, she was assigned a rap part for the original song Fake It, a rap part that was basically all in English. And this was a struggle for Fuko considering she had never rapped before and she didn't speak English either. That was the first time she was doing something that was actually out of her comfort zone. But she failed. The judges suggested someone else should do that part because she wasn't good enough, and instead of trying harder to master that part, Fuko was actually happy and relieved to change part and sing something else. That was the first real challenge for her and she avoided it, deciding to play it safe. I cannot blame her at all, especially considering that was the finale and it's understandable she didn't want to take the risk. But I believe that one of the reasons the judges did not pick her as a producer pick is because she never risked and always played it safe. In conclusion, Fuko has always been talented, she's always been a great team player, but the reason she didn't make it is because she was objectively less interesting compared to other contestants. Another girl that suffered from the same problem as Fuko is Yuju. The lack of storyline was even worse than Fuko, and this time around it wasn't really her fault. Because unlike Fuko, who was fairly liked by the producers and was actually quite pushed initially, Yuju was never liked by them, so the lack of storyline was intentional. She never got angel edits like Fuko, but the thing is, she didn't get evil edited either, and you know what they say, negative attention is still attention, and attention is what you need in a survival show. Let's talk about Gyuri for a second. Her personality wasn't depicted in the best way at the start of the show. Mnet saw the way she reacted when things didn't go her way, and they decided to make the most of the situation and broadcast all of those moments, so that the viewers would develop a negative perception of Jiyoon, perceiving her as an immature brat who wasn't able to work in a team. This was initially detrimental to Jiyoon, but in the end, if she had not been negatively highlighted like that, I'm sure her debut wouldn't have been as secured, because part of the reason she grew so popular, aside from her amazing voice, is because she had the biggest growth among all the contestants. It's because we got to see a whole journey of Jiyoon maturing and becoming a confident and self-assured girl. If she had always been portrayed as a very mature contestant, maybe people would have gotten bored. So as weird as it might sound, thank God Mnet highlighted her negatively. I'm pretty sure that they tried to highlight Yuju negatively as well, but that didn't really work because in all honesty, there was never anything controversial about Yuju. The only thing they tried to do was pointing out her flaws and hyper-focusing on them, but that didn't really help with building a storyline for her. Yuju was just kinda there throughout the whole show. Earlier I said that if you don't have a compelling storyline, then you have to compensate with outstanding skills, and Yuju had a very outstanding skill, rapping. Too bad that the producers already had someone in mind to cover that role, someone who not only was good enough to replace Yuju, but who was also more interesting character-wise, and that someone was Coco. I'm 100% sure that if it wasn't for Coco, Yuju would have debuted as the token main rapper, but we had Coco, a good rapper, one of the best dancers, and on top of it all, a girl whose personality was instantly liked by everyone. She also had a whole storyline centered around being a foreigner that struggled with the language, but despite the difficulties she never gave up and worked hard. So how could have we realistically expected Yuju to compete with Coco's character? And notice how I'm mainly focusing on storylines and not skills, because in survival show storylines tend to matter more. Not to mention there was never a big difference in skills between Yuju and Coco in the first place, so the judges saw them as interchangeable, but Coco had the upper hand in terms of how interesting, quirky and likable she was. In conclusion, Yuju did not make it because her main skill was a skill that somebody else possessed, and that somebody just happened to be more palatable as a final member. Now on to Gyuri. The main problem with her is that the turning point for her happened way too late in the competition. She did get somewhat of a storyline, she did get good edits, and she did have the focus on her to a certain extent, but that all happened 2 episodes before the finale, so it was too late, especially because by the time in the competition everybody already has their top picks, and even if you start liking another contestant, it's pretty unlikely you're gonna drop your one pick and vote for another girl so far in the competition. That's why Gyuri ranked last in voting in the finale. Believe me, her popularity was rising. People were waking up to her good vocals, to her fresh stage presence and cute personality, but it was just too late. I did wonder why Mnet decided to push her so late in the competition, because if they wanted her to have a serious chance at debuting, they would have started way sooner, and I came to the conclusion that Mnet never really wanted her to make it. They just used her for shock factor. They didn't start highlighting her positively because they wanted her to have a shot at debut. I think they started to highlight her positively just to switch things up a little and make us believe there would be a dark horse who would unexpectedly debut. But also, it happened in order to implement Sarang's storyline. Now hear me out. Gyuri started to get Angel edited during the episode in which she performed 4 walls along with Fuko and Sarang. Among the 3, Fuko wasn't highlighted at all, as if she wasn't even there, while when it came to Sarang, it was all about her voice crack and her loss of confidence. The one who was actually highlighted positively was Gyuri, like a dark horse that pops out of nowhere and slays the performance, arguably doing the best job out of the 3. But this was all in relation to Sarang in my opinion. Gyuri was supposed to be the antagonist in Sarang's story. We had Sarang, the girl that had always done well and that had always been way more popular than Gyuri. Then we had Gyuri, the underdog that nobody really cared about before. But in that episode the roles changed. From being the skilled all-rounder, Sarang was painted as the unconfident girl who made a mistake twice in a row, and Gyuri was supposed to be the underdog nobody expected to stand out more than Sarang, but that actually ended up doing better than her. In fact, she got the highest score from the judges. This was supposed to make people think of Gyuri as a threat to Sarang's debut, the underdog that magically debuts instead of a much more popular girl that everybody considered pretty much a lock. Now, it's clear this whole thing was not intended to be a major storyline, like Jungkook vs Jiyoon, the battle of the main vocalists, or Sabi vs Jimin. The Battle of the Centers. It was supposed to be a little side story that would have taken place towards the end, not with the intent of having Gyuri debut, but with the intent of showing Sarang getting back up on her feet, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. In fact, Sarang totally slayed into the New World's performance in the semi-final, and she also slayed all the performances in the finale, while Gyuri kinda fell into the background once again despite doing well. All in all, Gyuri was never in the producer's plan for debut. I think they would have kept her in the shadows until the end if it wasn't for the fact that they figured they could use her to boost Sarang's story arc. Not to mention survival shows always do this thing where they decide to highlight a contestant towards the end, just so that we actually start believing they could be a dark horse and make an unexpected debut, just to spice things up a little and give us the illusion that the final lineup is not gonna be as predictable. But then the dark horse doesn't make it, because if you're so far in the competition it's realistically hard to gain a big support, enough to get you to debut over other contestants that are already popular. Lastly, Sujung. She was simply not part of the lineup the producers envisioned. That's literally it, because there was nothing Sujung really lacked. She had the talents, specifically dancing, but also had nice vocals, and she had the personality. In fact, she was definitely someone who had a much memorable storyline compared to girls like Fuko, Yuju and Gyuri. But just like we all have our ideal lineups in mind while watching a show, the judges do too, and I believe she simply wasn't part of any of those lineups. She was the best dancer in the show, but Mnet wanted Coco to debut, and Coco is a very good dancer, so another one wasn't needed. Sujung had good vocals, but realistically speaking she wasn't lead vocal level, and the choices for the vocal line was already established anyway. Lastly, just like Jiyoon, Sujung had a blunt personality and a very direct approach, which is definitely an interesting characteristic to have on a survival show because it can either make you or break you. As we've seen with Jiyoon, this quality helped her build a positive story arc, because she went from being considered a rude person to becoming a mature and responsible girl who isn't afraid to stand up for herself. But for Sujung, her straightforward way of speaking her mind ended up being detrimental, literally the reason she didn't go to the finale in my opinion. I'm talking about when she was in the I Am the Best team with Mai. Mai was struggling to sing her parts right, and in a behind-the-scenes video Sujung was seen kinda mocking her way of singing, and talking about how Mai was executing her part wrong. Then Yuju asked Sujung if she planned on telling Mai what her mistakes were, but Sujung laughed it off and said no, that she wouldn't have told Mai, possibly hoping that the judges would end up criticizing Mai and become dissatisfied with her. Of course, survival shows are a competition, and I don't really want to blame Sujung for being competitive, even though I really didn't like the way she laughed about Mai's way of singing. But whatever. The thing is, this was not a good look on her, and I've seen countless of people dropping her out of their lineup. Now, obviously this doesn't mean Sujung is a mean person, and I don't think anyone genuinely ever thought she was evil, but people simply realized that maybe she was not suited to be in a group, because matter-of-factly this happened later on in the competition, when contestants should have learned to work in a team. It would have been more understandable if it happened in the beginning, but the fact it happened later on was the proof that Sujung didn't grow in terms of maturity, something that on the other hand, Jiyoon did. So in the end I think Sujung was generally not loved by the judges because they simply did not envision her in the final lineup. That's why they rarely praised her and mostly just criticized her, kinda like what they did with Yuju. Although I do believe that Sujung would have definitely reached the finale if it had not been for that whole situation with Mai. In conclusion, these were my opinions and my analysis on why some relatively popular contestants did not make it. I only talked about some of them because these were the only girls who could have realistically had at least a bit of a shot at making it, while for the others it was simply impossible and there just wasn't that much to say. In the end I hope they will all re-debut in the near future and I'll surely tune into their future activities. Anyways, thanks for sticking till the end. Bye everyone. See you in the next video.